Hello, my name is Andrew, and this is going to be my personal narrative, imaginative interview. And obviously, from the photos, I am choosing a man who was elected prime minister in 1940 to England. His name is Winston Churchill. As somebody who is very into history and is taking a lot of college courses in history, there's a lot of people that we learn about throughout all these courses when you take Western Civ, when you take American history, survey of American literature, but somebody who speaks out to me very, not loudly, but in a very powerful sense is Winston Churchill. I mean, he was involved with World War One, World War Two, um, a very powerful speaker. Um, some would say that he had kind of a malevolent presence sometimes in a room with other politicians because he would intimidate other people. But that's not true. He was actually a very kind, gentle man that had a very good heart, and he experienced a lot of failure in his life. He wasn't a perfect man, but he was elected a Nobel Prize for his accomplishments, and he's put kind of on the same platform almost as people, even like Shakespeare, because he had published a volume of novels about his experience dealing with World War II, and it's very powerful things that he was involved in. So, for instance, I'm going to start off by kind of going to the pictures. So, Winston Churchill originally dropped out of prep school. He wasn't a poor he wasn't a part of a poor family or anything like that. He was put into a prep school that he was basically being trained to be put into Oxford University or Cambridge, some of the most prestigious schools in the world. But his grades were actually so poor that he couldn't get in. So he pretty much just scratched the idea and went into military school. Um, from going through military school, he learned how to respect others. He learned how to be a man, take orders, listen to others, and he eventually started his political career. And he eventually became the prime minister to England in 1940. And he was meeting with world powers or the Allied powers to help, fight against the Western powers or the Eastern powers, which had captured France, which were the Nazis. And I will say, out of anybody in history that I've ever studied, Winston Churchill hates the Nazis the most. But one thing that separates him from his hatred between other people like Franklin Roosevelt or the Russians or anybody is he did not underestimate them. And that's something that's very powerful with him was he was scared for the soldiers. And they were trying to do something called Operation Overlord, which is basically what D-Day is, and he was very against the idea. And his proposed idea eventually later down the line was Operation Market Garden, which involved the airborne units that dropped in on three locations, which was Arnhem, Nijmegen, and Eindhoven. Obviously, the plan did not work out as successfully as it did because obviously with D-Day, there was a lot of casualties, a lot of people died, and this is something that he warned everybody about. He said, you're going to send in 200,000 vehicles, you're going to send in over 250,000 men, a lot of people will die to the Nazis. But he hated them. And people were intimidated by his anger when he would go into a room with other politicians and he would express so much emotion and say, I am here to represent the individual soldier. And that is something that is very powerful out of any other politician that I've ever learned about. Somebody that is that passionate to express his emotions like that in a room with superpowers like that. So going to questions that I would probably ask Winston Churchill is first, I would ask him, out of all the stuff that has come out today, like with movies, they have like a movie Churchill that came out in 2017. They have The Crown on Netflix. There's so many things that perceive Winston Churchill now that show him as this, vigorous man who doesn't take crap from anybody, and he's very passionate about what he says. I would ask him, how do you feel how Hollywood perceives you? How do you feel how the people of Britain perceive you today? Because not that many people know this, but he actually burned his portrait of himself when it was revealed because he was so angry that he was so, in his own words, he was so pissed off because he said it made him, it wasn't him. And that's why I would ask him that question, because I would say, well, if you burned your own portrait of people that made of you, that's a perception of an artist that had of you, of your image. How will you feel of what people are coming out with Hollywood today? Another question I would ask him is, I would ask him, do you believe that you are a racist? And I'm not saying this because I think he's a racist. I'm saying this because there's a lot of people out there that actually perceive him today as a white supremacist. There's people that say, oh, well, he supported the white man, and he said in a lot of his behind the scenes, he would mention, quote unquote, he would talk about the Negroes, and he wouldn't involve them in the same light sometimes as white people. But I don't truly believe he was racist. I think that's just during the time. I think there was a separation, but I don't think he was racist. But I would ask him if he believed he was a supremacist. Another question I would ask him is, I would say, as somebody who has so much power and so much emotion that comes off when you're in these rooms, major superpowers, like when you're with Franklin Roosevelt and you're with the Russians and you're with Scotland and the Irish leaders talking about World War II, how did you convey your emotion to them, that you were sensitive towards the individual soldier, and how did you convince them that there was going to be a lot of bloodshed, and how was that personal sensitivity in yourself given off to them, and how did they truly feel when they saw that you were truly sensitive to the idea of war, but you did hate the Nazis so much? But those are the main questions that I would definitely ask him. I'm sure if I was in a room with him, it would be a cigar smoke filled room. He would probably offer me a cigar. And he would also probably talk about art. He's an artist. But he's a wonderful speech giver, and he's a wonderful man that was sensitive truly to soldiers and played a huge part in World War II. Thank you. That's all I have.